1 Samuel Chapter 29. And the Philistines gathered all their camps together at Aphek, and Israel encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men passed on at the rear with Achish. And the princes of the Philistines said, What are these Hebrews doing here? And Achish said to the princes of the Philistines, Is this not David, the servant of Saul the king of Israel, who has been with me these days, or even these years? And I have found nothing wrong in him since the day he deserted to me to this day. But the princes of the Philistines were angry with him. And the princes of the Philistines said to him, Make the man go back, that he may return to his place that you have assigned him, so that he does not go down with us into the battle and does not become our adversary in the battle. For with what might this man reconcile himself to his master? Will it not be with the heads of these men? Is this not David, of whom they sang to one another in dances, saying, Saul has struck down his thousands, but David, his 10,000s? And Achish called David and said to him, As Jehovah lives, you are upright, and it is acceptable in my sight that you go forth and come in with me in the camp, for I have not found evil in you since the day you came to me to this day. But you are not acceptable to the lords. Now therefore return and go in peace, so that you do not do anything displeasing to the lords of the Philistines. And David said to Achish, But what have I done? And what wrong have you found in your servant since the day I began to be with you to this day, that I should not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king? And Achish answered and said to David, I know that you are as acceptable to me as an angel of God. Nevertheless the princes of the Philistines have said, He shall not go up with us into the battle. Now therefore rise up early in the morning with your master's servants who came with you, indeed rise up early in the morning, and when you have daylight, go. So David rose up early, he and his men, to go in the morning, to return into the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. 1 Samuel Chapter 30. And when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid upon the south and upon Ziklag, and they had struck Ziklag and burned it with fire. And they had taken the women who were in it captive, both small and great, they had killed none, but had carried them off, and had gone on their way. And David and his men came to the city, and there it was, burned with fire. And their wives and their sons and their daughters had been taken captive. And David and the people who were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no strength to weep. And David's 2 wives had been taken captive, Ahinoam the Jezreelite and Abigail the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And David was very distressed because the people spoke of stoning him, for the soul of all the people was bitter, every man because of his sons and his daughters. But David strengthened himself in Jehovah his God. And David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, Bring the ephod to me. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. And David inquired of Jehovah, saying, Shall I pursue after this band? Will I overtake them? And he said to him, Pursue, for you will certainly overtake them, and you will certainly deliver them. So David went, he and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those who were left stayed behind. And David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross over the brook Besor. And they found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David. And they gave him food, and he ate, and they gave him water to drink. And they gave him a piece of fig cake and 2 raisin cakes, and he ate, and his spirit returned to him, for he had eaten no food and had drunk no water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, To whom do you belong and where are you from? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, the servant of an Amalekite man, and my master abandoned me because I fell sick 3 days ago. We attacked the south of the Cherethites and what belongs to Judah and the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. And David said to him, Can you lead me down to this band? And he said, Swear to me by God that you will neither kill me nor deliver me into the hand of my master, and I will lead you down to this troop. And he led him down, and there they were, spread over the whole land, eating and drinking and celebrating because of all the great spoil that they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them from twilight until the evening of the next day, and not a man of them escaped except for 400 young men, who rode upon camels, and fled. And David delivered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David delivered his 2 wives. And nothing was missed by them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil nor anything that they had taken. David brought everything back. And David took all the flocks and the herds, which they drove before the other cattle and of which they said, This is David's spoil. Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David and who had been left behind at the brook Besor. And they went forth to meet David and to meet the people who were with him, and David came near to the people and greeted them. And all the wicked and worthless men among the men that had gone with David responded, and they said, Because they did not go with us, we will not give them anything of the spoil that we have delivered, except every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them off and go away. Then said David, Ye shall not do so, my brothers, with that which Jehovah has given us, who has kept us and given this band that came against us into our hand. And who will listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down to the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage, they shall share alike. And from that day forward he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. And David came to Ziklag, and he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah, to his companions, saying, Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of Jehovah. For those in Bethel, and for those in Ramoth of the south, and for those in Jadar. And for those in Aroer, and for those in Siphmoth, and for those in Eshtemoa. And for those in Rasel, and for those in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, and for those in the cities of the Kenites. And for those in Hormah, and for those in Borashan, and for those in Aphek. And for those in Hebron, and for all the places where David himself and his men had gone about. 1 Samuel Chapter 31. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines chased Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, Saul's sons. And the battle bore heavily against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, Draw your sword, and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was very afraid. So Saul took his sword and fell on it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he likewise fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer, as well as all his men, died that day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and who were on the other side of the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. And the next day the Philistines came to strip the slain, and they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and they sent them all around, throughout the land of the Philistines in order to announce the good news in the houses of their idols and to the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men rose up and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-shan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk at Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days.